male who grew up with no sisters writes as a 16-year-old female in this fictional tale, An Otherwise Perfect Plan, a novel of mystery, love, and of chocolate that defies description. Equally fascinating is the voiceover of all the characters, male and female, are executed by one talent. If you have ever gone on a journey to find an unknown parent, or you just want an engaging book that just draws you in and you just forget time, this is it. My guest, Ken Schaer, started his writing career as a screenwriter, and he has his hand in projects like Star Trek, a prequel to Sleeping Beauty, and ABC Nights at the Movies, and other children and adult novels. An Otherwise Perfect Plan, a novel of mystery, love, and of chocolate that defies description, is his first young adult novel.
You are watching Influence Media, PSI TV, the Netflix of biz brands.
Welcome, Ken.
Thank you for having us.
And we have with you the beautiful Renee Canon. Welcome.
Hello, thank you for having me.
So, ladies and gentlemen, I read this book. And I have to tell you, it's not a very quick read, but it's not going to be a 4-hour deal. It's going to be a while, okay? But you don't even feel the time. It just draws you in, and you want to see what the next thing is. That's kind of how it works. But what really fascinated me is this man. Look at this man right here. Ken Schaer wrote as a 16-year-old female. I tell you what, guys, when I was reading the book, I'm like, my guest is Ken Schaer. The protagonist is Gwen, a 16-year-old. I texted him and I said, just to be sure, are you male, female, fluid? What's the deal? And he said, oh, cis male, happily married. I'm like, oh, so how did you do this? No, ladies and gentlemen, listen to this carefully. I'm going to read something from his book and tell me if you aren't as convinced as I am that he somehow tapped into the female psyche. Listen to this. My tears, however, are impervious to logic. And another one follows the first, probably just to rub in the fact that it could. You tell me. I thought, I read this thing and I thought, this character, Gwen, was authentic female. I was like, how did he do this? So, Ken, how did you do it?
Oh, I'd say the real answer to that is I started writing this when my daughter was about 15. And she is nothing like Gwen at all. She's, other than they both were obsessed by books and loved reading. So she would carry books around everywhere, and she got me interested in reading YA books because she was reading them at the time.
YA is?
Young adult.
Young adult.
And all of her friends were girls. And so I guess I just picked it up from osmosis, you know. Yeah, I mean, for me, the voice of Gwen just sort of came to me. I mean, she just felt very natural, and I don't know what the magic is, but I'm glad to hear it worked.
It did, because honestly, Ken, I think you've tapped into something, and the men of the world will be asking you to write the Girl Decoded book as your next masterpiece. I don't know what to tell you, but I think that one needs to come. So,
yeah, okay, I'll work on that.
The journey from never knowing her father, that's the protagonist, Gwen, to obsessively trying to find him at the displeasure of her mother, I believe you capture that emotional highs and lows of this experience of not knowing who the father is, a search for that father. What kind of research or observations or pains or what was it? How did you speak to that future fictional writer? Speak to the future fictional writer, because you really have a gift, and it's not just storytelling, but it's connecting strong emotion to the character and making the book come alive. So speak to the future writer.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I didn't do any real sort of research per se. I mean, I grew up outside of Boston, so the setting was very familiar. My brother actually lives in Roxbury, and but it was really more sort of seeing what was going on with my daughter and her friends and taking little bits and pieces of their lives and not taking them directly, but just sort of absorbing them and putting them together. And then, once I had sort of the idea of the character, she just seemed to very much flow. And there's something as a writer that we talk about just sort of the characters wanting to do what they want to do. And a lot of that sort of comes out of dialogue, that you may have an idea for a scene where I want this to happen, but as you start doing the back and forth of the dialogue, it starts going off in another direction. And a lot of times I just feel like you have to go with that, because what feels natural for the character really sort of feeds into the story, and that to make it authentic, you have to sort of listen to the voice as it comes out, and not try and force it into your necessarily preconceived ideas of where it's going to go. I don't know if that makes any sense, but that's sort of my process.
So my son, he's big on character development, and I think you did even if you can't help the next writer figure out how
Right.
to do it, you clearly have the gift of doing it.
Thank you.
The character of Gwen, I really felt almost like a voyeur, kind of watching a reality show, because
Right.
yeah, that's how it felt, and it felt like she was talking to me.
Well, that was one of the fun things about Gwen's character, is it's first person, which is sort
Yes.
of not uncommon for, young adult novels. But what I think is a little different is she actually talks to the audience as if they were a friend, part of the story. I mean, at one point she hits her friend Peter and says, ow, it's like hitting a brick wall. Remind me not to do that again. And then later on in the story, she does it again, and she says, "Some help you were, why didn't you?" As if there were actually a connection between you. And there are other moments in that where she really talks to you as if you were there, rather than just sort of narrating. And I think that gives it that sort of feeling of being there, and being a voyeur or being a participant in it, that is a little different.
Now, the book takes place in Boston, and my
Yep.
son lives in Boston. So when you wrote this, I was like, oh my gosh, if you haven't been to Boston, guys, this is Boston right here. We stop at the street corner for the usual reasons. We have a do not cross light, and even more importantly, Bostonians drive like they're in a giant video game, one where speeding around like a lunatic is somehow a good idea. That is so true. I mean, you're also making the setting come alive.
Yep. Yeah.
Wow. So Renee, you were the narrator of this book, the single voiceover talent for all the characters, male and female. It is so nice to have you with us. How did you, first of all, tell us, you're a teacher. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I am a music teacher. Been teaching music for about 2 years now, but have been in the classroom since on and off since 2014. So that is my life.
Yeah.
I love teaching. I love kids, and teaching music has been such a joy.
So how did you and Ken connect?
Yeah, I have been interested in doing voiceover for a while now. And I took a class about a year ago now that kind of led into this website called ACX, which was a platform for authors to put their books, and you can audition to do the voice work for them. And so I submitted my audition after this class. I found out about that website. I submitted my audition to Ken, and I believe it was between me and one other person, and Ken picked me, and it was just such a joy and a blessing.
Well, one of the reasons I remember picking you was actually I really liked a lot of your first audition, but there were some, I think it was just some sound
Technical
issues with
things.
it, technical issues with it. And I went back to you and said, I really like this, but, if you could do this or that or the other. And you were so responsive and enthusiastic, and you really, you brought her alive in a way that I couldn't be happier with. But, you're also great to work with, and that really made the difference.
So authors, if you're listening and you're thinking of having your book made into an audiobook, this may be an option for you. Maybe even Renee might be a voiceover talent for you.
Oh yeah, one of the things that I found just so amazing was not only were you able to do a variety of male voices, but you were able to take the mom and the daughter, which are both obviously female voices, and make them substantively different to the point where I actually had to go back in and edit out a lot of the he said or she said, mom said, whatever, because it became really redundant because it was so clear who was talking. And I just found it so amazing that you were able to differentiate between, their voices so much.
Yeah. It was definitely a fun, like a interesting and challenging process, because I think because there were so many characters to voice, it was like the idea of like, how do I make this character sound different from, especially if they were both male or both female. Like I remember for Not Dad, we started with just kind of like a deeper voice, and then Ken asked for like kind of a grizzle to it, and so it was like, okay, how do I make this work? So it was really good for me, because I was able to add some more characters into like my toolbox of characters that I can pull out for, future auditions.
Well, Renee, when I was listening to the audiobook, the clip, and we'll play the clip for the audience, there were times when you're seamlessly going from the male to the female. Were those recorded all at once, or did you do them separate and put them together?
Usually always just recorded all at once. I believe it's
Wow.
chapter 8 where it's a conversation between Gwen and Not Dad, and I just had to switch back and forth between them. Because usually my process was we would work on a chapter at a time, and I would read the chapter again, because I've read the whole book all the way through as well. And then I would read the chapter again. And my fiance, who thankfully is a musician and producer and is used to working with a lot of different audio technology, he was a great help for especially coming to edit things. But we would just sit down and I would, get started. I would just read through and act out the parts. And so, yeah, it was just a matter of like swallowing, taking a sip of water between each character, especially Not Dad, because he has more of that grizzle. But yeah, it was just sitting down and making it work.
He's sitting in one such chair looking off into space, his forehead wrinkled as he tries to place my voice.
I'm sorry, can I ask who's calling?
He finally says. Of course, I reply out of force of habit before I can stop myself. But the silence at the other end of the line isn't the good silence of a baffled telemarketer, but is rather a thick silence with the man who might be my dad.
So Ken, chapter 14 is one word. The entire chapter is one word. Now I have the ebook. So I loaded it. I saw the one word. I said, hold up, maybe the rest of the chapter hasn't loaded. I went back, I came back, I was like, it's one word. I mean, I've never seen that in a book before. And if it's not new, I definitely haven't seen it. So what was the strategy there?
It was pretty much again just not Renee, sorry, Gwen talking to the audience, and also later on there's some chapters where she basically says, "Go away, read some other book for a while. I'm busy," and it was pretty much just sort of that attitude of really getting into where she was and sort of talking to the audience as if they were her friend and confidant. So yeah, it just happened.
Those were the funnest chapters to record.
Because they were one word.
One word.
All right. So in the book, we're introduced to Mr. Inc. INC. Well, I think it's it was spelled INK, but it really meant INC, because we're talking about the corporation as a legal person and the person as a corporation. And it was something that was said in the book. I found the concept fascinating. Explain.
Well, I don't want to give too much away because there's a bit of a spoiler there, but basically the idea came out of, corporations are people, and which strikes me and a lot of people as kind of ridiculous. And that what if you flip that on its head? And basically, it wasn't meant to be sort of a realistic thing so much as a let's point out how ridiculous this is by going to the extreme. So that's more what's going on, and that in many ways Gwen and her father sort of had that in common, that they look at things in sort of weird, slightly off-kilter ways, and just sort of push it in that direction, and that's really what that was about.
Mm. Okay, so as I was researching you, Ken, I looked at how the book was described on Amazon. It's definitely in the description on Amazon, pitched to young adult. But I mean, I'm 58. I totally enjoyed the book, and I read some of the comments, and it seemed like they were older people as well. So yes, it is pitched to the younger crowd. I think it's relevant to the younger crowd, but the older crowd will appreciate it, guys. So let me just say that. But considering that the young adults these days is like, as soon as they're done with school, they never pick up another book. That seems to be a thing. They are out of school, they never pick up another book. How do you feel about this demographic, the young adult? And because that's what the book's really pitched at. How do you feel about that demographic?
Well, I'm sure that that's true for a lot of them, but I mean, I sort of base this on my daughter, who was never without a book, and still now is a voracious reader, and as are a lot of her friends. Now, admittedly, she's now at 25, and no longer quite the target range, but I do think that a lot of them still do just love reading, and that there still is a real market for this. There's certainly major authors, in this area, John Green and, the Percy Jackson books and whatnot. So I don't think it's as bleak as you describe it. I think
But
that
I
there
know when
are,
I was that age, I grew up reading the Nancy Drew series and the
of
Harvey
course,
Boys series. That was
yeah,
also young adult, and I was one of those voracious readers.
yeah.
Maybe you'll even get a movie out of this.
Hey, I wouldn't argue with that.
Well, you know how to
Um,
write the screenplay, so there you go.
there
Now,
you go.
um,
Um,
yeah,
But I would agree with you that a lot of my audience does seem to be adults, even to the point of, I don't know if you know the television series Sharknado, but it's this very campy sci-fi series, and the author of that actually read my book, and I'm thinking, this really does not seem like his cup of tea. And he left me this lovely, lovely review where he said, he missed Gwen not being in her head anymore, and that the book really stuck with him. So you're right. I think it really, resonates to people of a whole range of ages.
especially because of the concepts in the story. So the other thing is, can audiobooks are a growing format for books. And you have both the physical book and the audiobook and the ebook, all three. Um, and audiobooks are really growing as a listen on the go type of format. Have you seen any data to suggest whether the print or the audio is selling better for you?
Not yet, because we literally just released the audiobook like a couple of weeks ago. But I'm sure it'll do well, because I know a lot of people who basically say, they don't have any time to read, but, they're in the car or whatever, and they'll listen to an audiobook. And, I think it's so her
Or on
job
the
that
treadmill?
what or the treadmill or whatever, that allows you, that it's something that you could do while you're doing something else. And that's the big benefit of it. So I think it'll do really well. I hope so, because the job that Renee did on it really deserves to be heard. So yeah.
Ken, you've written other books. Can you quickly tell us the titles of those so we could go check some of those?
Um, I've written another novel called Greensleeves, which is a historical fantasy set in pre-Elizabethan times, and it's a mix of the history of the time and the mythology of the time, which is really fun because it basically takes the history and gives an underlying explanation that has to do with the mythology and the elves, and it's kind of a forbidden love story, and it's entitled Greensleeves. And then I've also done a number of children's books, one of which is called The Cow Who Conquered the Moon. And it's about a cow who discovers that the farmer reads books to his children each night, and she sneaks out of the barn to go and listen to these stories, and she hears about the cow who jumps over the moon and decides that she's going to start and try and do that. And that's all done in verse, so there once was a cow, a most marvelous beast, the fastest fly flicker in all the northeast. She spent all her day in fast fly-flicking fun, and when the sun set and the long day was done, she'd creep from the barn to the house on the hill, where under the window she'd lie very still, and so on. And there are actually 2 more books in that series that are also sort of based on the frog prince, because one of her friends is a frog, and she decides, oh, he must be a prince, and so on. And then I have another children's book that I'm working on with a friend of mine who's an amazing artist, and it's called A is for Ah! And it's a Halloween alphabestiary, we're calling it. And it's sort of putedly an alphabet book, but there's a story to it. And A is for that you yell at the sound of a very loud boo, though there's no one around. And it goes from there. So yeah, those are the types of things I'm working on, and then I'm actually working on a sequel to An Otherwise Perfect Plan. So I'm keeping busy.
Well, I was going to ask you what's next, but you just told me. All right. There you have it, for folks. Ken Schaer and Renee Canon on PSI TV, and Ken can be found at kenschafer.com. I will put the spelling for that so you don't miss it, and you can get all his books there, as well as where all books are sold. So Ken, thank you for being my guest today. Renee, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Yes.